Zuber and Company, fire forensic experts and forensic engineers. Seeking answers from ashes. Seeking answers.
All right, let's dive into a story that is quite literally a trial by fire. This isn't just any legal case. It's a drama that starts with a catastrophic blaze, involves the life savings of hundreds of farmers, and ends with a Supreme Court decision that actually changes how we think about who a consumer really is. Let's get right into it.
So, picture this. It's the dead of night, January 14th, 2014. A fire rips through a massive cold storage facility. And we're not talking about a small fire here. This was an absolute inferno that leveled the entire building.
And what was inside that building? Well, it was the entire livelihood of hundreds of farmers. We're talking tons and tons of valuable produce, especially a famous crop called Byadgi chili. It's super valuable, used in cosmetics and all sorts of things. And overnight, it was all just gone, turned to ash.
Now, here's the real kicker. All of that stock was insured for a huge amount of money. It was supposed to be the one thing they could count on, their financial safety net. But when the farmers tried to claim what they were owed, the insurance company flat out refused to pay, not a single rupee. So what do you do when the system designed to protect you fails?
So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the fire itself and the mess that followed. Then, we'll look at the 6 big arguments the insurance company used to deny the claim. After that, we'll see how the Supreme Court completely dismantled their case, piece by piece. We'll get into this key idea of being a beneficiary, then look at the final, complex verdict, and wrap up with why this case is so important for every single one of us.
Okay, to really get what's going on, you have to understand the setup before the fire. It seemed like a pretty standard arrangement, one that hundreds of farmers were depending on, but it all came down to a few critical agreements.
So here's the play-by-play. The farmers would store their chili, which, fun fact, actually gets more valuable the longer it's stored. To cover their costs in the meantime, they'd get loans from Canara Bank, using that stored chili as collateral. And the glue holding this all together was something called a tripartite agreement. It's a contract signed by the farmer, the bank, and the cold store. And it had one crucial rule. The stock had to be insured. It was a non-negotiable part of the deal. Then, of course, the fire happens, and the insurance company says, "Nope, we're not paying."
And we need to be clear about the stakes here. This wasn't some minor insurance policy. The farmer's stock, on its own, was insured for 30 crore rupees. That's millions of dollars, an absolutely life-shattering amount of money to lose.
So you have to wonder, how in the world could an insurance company justify walking away from a claim this big? Well, they didn't just have one reason. They built an entire wall of legal arguments, trying to block the farmers at every single turn.
They really threw everything at the wall to see what would stick. They said it was arson. They argued the farmers weren't technically consumers. They brought up privity of contract, which is just a fancy legal term for saying, hey, we didn't have a direct contract with you. They even claimed the goods were held in trust, which their policy conveniently excluded. And to top it all off, they accused the farmers of misrepresentation and fraud. It was a full-on legal assault.
But this is where the story turns. The case made its way all the way to the Supreme Court of India. And the court was not impressed. It proceeded to tear down that entire wall of arguments, brick by brick.
First things first, what caused the fire? The insurer hired private investigators who insisted it was arson, that they found traces of kerosene. But every single official report, from the forensic science lab, the police, the electrical inspector, they all came to the same, very different conclusion. It was an accidental electrical short circuit.
And the court did not hold back. They called the insurer's investigation shoddy. Why? Because the private investigators said they found hydrocarbons, which they claimed proved kerosene was used. But they never bothered to test the building's insulation materials, the thermocol and bitumen, which are, made of hydrocarbons. Of course they'd be in the debris after a fire. It was a massive, embarrassing blunder.
Okay, so we've established the fire was an accident. But that brings us to the real million-dollar question in this whole case. The farmers themselves never actually signed the insurance policy. The cold storage did. So how could they have any right to make a claim? Weren't they legal strangers to the contract?
And this is where the Supreme Court made a truly game-changing call.
It all came down to this simple, powerful idea. Being the beneficiary of a service makes you anything but a stranger. So, the court went straight to the law books, specifically India's Consumer Protection Act. The definition starts out simply enough, right? A consumer is just someone who pays for a service. So in this case, you'd think that's just the cold store, since they paid the premium.
Well, wait for it. Right there in the law is this crucial little clause. The definition of a consumer also includes any beneficiary of the service. And that changed everything. The whole point of insuring the stock wasn't to protect the cold store's building. It was to protect the farmer's goods inside the building.
And this quote from the court just nails it. The farmers are consumers, not because their name is on the insurance policy, but because they are the clear intended beneficiaries of that policy. That tripartite agreement they all signed was the proof. The whole reason for the insurance's existence was to protect them.
And the court just kept rolling, knocking down the other arguments. That claim about the goods being held in trust? The court said, absolutely not. The farmers were paying rent. It was a paid service, a commercial bailment, not some informal trust agreement. So, that exclusion in the policy? Totally irrelevant. So the insurer lost. They had to pay up. But the final decision wasn't as simple as just writing one big check to the farmers. The court's ruling on who gets paid what was actually very specific and very fair.
Check this out. First in line was the bank. They got their loan money back, plus interest. But, and this is wild, the court actually penalized the bank for a deficiency of service. They lowered the interest rate the bank could claim because, as the court saw it, the bank should have made sure the insurer had all the paperwork from the start. They could have prevented this whole legal nightmare. Then, after the bank was paid, every remaining penny of the insurance payout went directly to the farmers, plus interest calculated from the date of the fire.
So look, this might seem like a niche story about some chili farmers in India, but the principles that came out of the Supreme Court decision, they have huge implications for all of us, no matter where we live.
Yeah, really. What does this actually mean for you? It makes you stop and think, right? What rights do you have that you might not even be aware of just by being connected to a service someone else paid for? So here are the big takeaways. First, the idea of being a consumer is way bigger than you probably thought. Second, you can absolutely have legal rights under a contract you never even signed, as long as you are the intended beneficiary. Third, courts are willing to look at the real purpose and intent of an agreement, not just who signed on the dotted line. And finally, big players like banks and financial institutions have a real duty to be careful and diligent. They can't just be passive.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Think about it. Your landlord's insurance, the shipping company's policy for a package you ordered, your employer's liability coverage. How many agreements out there in your life right now are creating a web of protection for people you don't even know, and maybe even for you? It's a powerful thought. Thanks for joining me for this one.